The rain was coming down in silver sheets that night, drumming softly against the glass windows of a small roadside diner just outside Reno. Inside, the place smelled of fresh coffee and grilled bacon. A few truckers sat hunched over their late-night meals. A waitress hummed quietly as she wiped the counter, and in the far corner booth sat a man who seemed to belong to another world. Steven Seagal was dressed in a simple black jacket, the collar slightly raised, his broad shoulders leaning back against the vinyl seat. His sunglasses rested on the table beside his steaming cup of coffee. To anyone who didn't recognize him, he looked like just another traveler stopping to escape the storm. The diner door banged open, letting in a gust of cold wind and 3 men smelling of wet leather and beer. Their leader, Randy, was tall and heavyset with a swagger that came from years of bullying others. He immediately noticed the quiet man in the corner. "Look at the tough guy sitting all alone," Randy said loud enough for the whole diner to hear. His 2 friends snickered as they headed toward Steven's booth. Steven didn't raise his eyes. He took a slow sip of his coffee. The quietness of his reaction seemed to bother Randy more than an insult ever could. "You deaf old man," Randy sneered, stepping closer. He bumped the edge of Steven's table with his hip, sloshing some coffee onto the saucer. A hush settled over the diner. The waitress froze mid-step, eyes wide. Steven set his cup down carefully, reached for a napkin, and wiped the spill with calm, deliberate movements, still without a word. The silence made Randy grin. "Guess he's scared," he said. "Big guy like you can't even look me in the eye." When Steven didn't respond, Randy's grin twisted into something meaner. In one quick motion, he slapped Steven across the face, not hard enough to knock him down, but loud enough to make the entire diner gasp. For a heartbeat, time seemed to stop. The only sound was the rain on the glass. Steven slowly turned his head back toward Randy, his eyes calm yet unreadable. For a long, heavy second after the slap, no one in the diner moved. The sound of rain pelting the windows filled the silence, mingling with the faint hum of the jukebox in the corner. A few truckers exchanged uneasy glances but kept their heads down. No one wanted to get involved, at least not yet. Steven Seagal didn't react the way Randy expected. There was no flash of anger, no defensive move. Instead, Steven blinked slowly and picked up his napkin again, gently blotting the spot on his cheek where Randy's palm had landed. The calmness in his movements only deepened the tension, like the air before a thunderstorm. "Look at this guy," Randy chuckled, turning to his friends for approval. "Doesn't even fight back. Guess the old man's too scared." His friends laughed nervously. They were used to Randy picking on people, but something about Steven's composure was unsettling. The waitress, a young woman named Claire, finally spoke up. "Hey Randy, why don't you just leave him alone? He hasn't done anything to you." Randy shot her a glare. "Mind your business, sweetheart. The guy's just sitting there like he owns the place. Maybe he needs a little wake-up call." Steven's voice broke the silence, deep, calm, and measured. "There's no need for any of this. I'm just here to drink my coffee in peace." The words were soft, but they carried an authority that made the bully falter for half a second. Unfortunately, Randy's pride wouldn't let him back down in front of an audience. "Peace? Then why are you staring at me, huh?" Randy leaned closer, pressing his knuckles on the table as if daring Steven to react. "I wasn't staring," Steven replied, his tone still even. "But I can see you're having a rough night. Maybe you should sit down and finish your meal before things get worse." The truckers in the corner exchanged glances. One of them whispered, "This guy doesn't sound scared at all." Claire quietly picked up the phone behind the counter and dialed the sheriff's office. She explained in a low voice that there was trouble at the diner. The storm outside was slowing things down, and the dispatcher promised to send someone as soon as possible. Randy seemed to notice the hushed phone call. "You calling the cops on me?" he barked at Claire. "For what?" "I just tapped the guy. He ain't gonna do nothing." Steven's eyes met Claire's briefly, a look that told her to stay calm. Then he turned his gaze back to Randy. "I don't want trouble," Steven said, "but I won't let you hurt anyone else in here. Sit down, finish your coffee, and this can end right now." Something about the way he said it, firm but without raising his voice, made the bully's grin waver. But before the mood could shift, one of Randy's friends, a wiry man with a baseball cap, tried to pump him up. "Come on, man. Show him who's boss. Don't let this old guy talk to you like that." Randy straightened his back, his pride reigniting. You think you can tell me what to do in my town? He asked Steven, jabbing a finger in his direction. Steven didn't answer immediately. Instead, he leaned back slightly, folding his arms across his chest. A small gesture, but it somehow made him seem larger, more unshakable. Respect goes both ways, Steven finally said. You've made your point. Now walk away before you regret it. The tension in the diner was so thick that even the jukebox seemed to grow quieter. Claire stayed near the phone, her thumb hovering over the call button again. A middle-aged man at the counter who had been quietly sipping his soup decided to speak up. Hey, leave the guy alone, Randy. He's not bothering anyone. Sit down before you make a fool of yourself. Randy turned his frustration on the man. You want to say that again? The man held his ground, but his voice stayed level. You're gonna regret this if you keep pushing. Some people aren't who they appear to be. Randy snorted, dismissing the warning. Yeah, what's he gonna do, call his mommy? The insult drew a few nervous chuckles from his friends, but most of the customers stayed silent, sensing something unpredictable simmering beneath Steven's composure. Steven finally shifted forward in his seat, resting his forearms on the table, his gaze locked onto Randy's, sharp as a blade. You've already crossed the line once tonight, Steven said quietly. Don't cross it again. Randy's grin faltered, but his ego still wouldn't let go. He stepped even closer to the booth, towering over Steven. Claire whispered to the man at the counter, I hope the sheriff gets here soon. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance, as if echoing the storm brewing inside the diner. The room held its breath, waiting to see if the quiet stranger in the black jacket would finally snap, or if Randy's temper would push things over the edge. The diner felt smaller by the minute. The storm outside lashed the windows with gusts of wind and sheets of rain, as if nature itself sensed the tension inside. The smell of coffee and fried onions mixed with the scent of wet leather from Randy's jacket as he loomed over Steven's booth. Claire kept glancing at the door, silently pleading for the sheriff to show up. The truckers at the counter had stopped eating entirely, their eyes fixed on the scene unfolding before them. Randy's hand still rested on the edge of Steven's table, his knuckles white as he leaned in. You think you're better than me, huh? Sitting there with your fancy jacket acting like you don't care. I know your type, Steven met his glare calmly. I don't think I'm better than anyone, but I'm not going to let you keep disrespecting everyone in here. The words weren't shouted, but the quiet force behind them made Randy's friends exchange uncertain looks. One of them, the wiry man in the baseball cap, muttered, Hey Randy, maybe just cool it. No point in dragging this out. Randy shot him a sharp look. What, you scared of this guy? The friend raised his palms. No, just saying, doesn't seem worth it. Randy ignored him and turned back to Steven. You got some mouth on you for a guy who just got slapped. Steven shifted in his seat, leaning forward slightly. His broad shoulders seemed to fill the booth, his presence radiating calm authority. I gave you a chance to walk away. Don't make another mistake. The warning, spoken in that steady tone, sounded less like a threat and more like a fact of nature. The customers felt it too. Several shifted uncomfortably, sensing that something irreversible was close at hand. Trying to provoke a reaction, Randy grabbed the front of Steven's jacket and yanked him forward. The booth creaked under the sudden movement. Stand up when I talk to you, Randy barked. Steven didn't resist, but he didn't rise either. His voice dropped to a level barely above a whisper. You should let go of my jacket. You still have a choice. For a brief moment, Randy hesitated. His hand loosened just enough for Steven to ease back against the booth again, unruffled. Claire's nerves finally broke. Please, both of you, just stop. The sheriff's on his way. You don't want to spend the night in jail, Randy. Her words only inflamed Randy's pride. He swung his attention toward her. Stay out of this, Claire, or I'll... He never finished the sentence because Steven's gaze snapped toward him like a hawk zeroing in on prey. There was no movement, no raised hand, just that unblinking stare. It was enough to make Randy's next words die in his throat. A teenager sitting near the jukebox whispered to his friend, This guy's not scared at all. He's just waiting. The remark wasn't meant to be heard, but it added fuel to Randy's frustration. He turned back to Steven, leaning even closer, practically nose to nose. You think you're some kind of hero? You ain't nothing in my town. I run things here. Steven slowly shook his head. A man who needs to hurt others to feel powerful doesn't run anything. He's just lost. The insult was quiet, but it cut deep. Randy's face turned red. With a grunt of anger, he shoved Steven hard against the booth. The impact made the table rattle, the silverware clinking like a warning bell. Gasps rippled through the diner. One of the truckers stood up halfway, ready to intervene, but hesitated when Steven raised a single hand to signal he had it under control. Claire's voice trembled as she said, "Please, just stop this before someone gets hurt." But it was too late to appeal to reason. Randy was beyond hearing anyone now. "You want me to stop?" "Make me," he growled. Steven exhaled slowly, a breath that sounded like patience running thin. "I said I didn't want trouble. Don't push me past that." The storm outside growled with thunder, as though punctuating his words. Then Randy made his final mistake. He shoved Steven again, harder this time, nearly knocking the cup of coffee to the floor. The calm in Steven's expression didn't falter, but something in his eyes shifted. The patience was gone. At that moment, the diner door creaked open. Everyone's attention flicked to the tall figure who stepped in from the rain, water dripping from his long coat. He paused, scanning the tense scene before his eyes locked on Steven at the booth. "Dad?" the man said in a low, steady voice that carried easily across the room. "Is everything all right here?" Randy blinked, surprised. "Dad?" he repeated, glancing between Steven and the newcomer. The customers murmured among themselves. No one knew who the stranger was yet. But the way he carried himself, calm, alert, and purposeful, made it clear he wasn't just another diner patron. The diner door swung shut with a thud as the tall man stepped out of the rain. Water dripped from the hem of his long, charcoal gray coat, forming tiny puddles on the linoleum floor. The overhead lights caught the edge of his badge-shaped lapel pin, though nobody noticed it at first. His eyes swept the room, one sharp, assessing glance that lingered a beat longer on Randy's clenched fists before settling on the man in the booth. The tension in his shoulders eased just slightly when he saw Steven sitting there, unharmed but visibly surrounded. "Dad," he said again, his deep voice steady yet threaded with concern. "Is everything all right here?" The word "Dad" struck the room like a spark in dry wood. The truckers exchanged looks, trying to piece it together. Claire's hand hovered over the phone again, instinctively sensing the dynamic had just shifted. Steven tilted his head toward the newcomer and offered the faintest nod of greeting. "Alex," he said evenly, "you're a little late for dinner." The hint of warmth in Steven's tone contrasted with the razor-edge calm he had used on Randy all night. It was the first sign of familiarity anyone had heard in his voice. Randy squinted at the man in the coat. "Dad, this your kid?" He gave a short, mocking laugh. "Guess it runs in the family. Both of you think you're better than everyone else." Alex ignored the jab and stepped closer, his boots leaving faint, wet prints on the tile. "Sir," he said to Randy, his tone controlled but authoritative, "I'm going to ask you to step back from my father's table." The bully scoffed and turned to his friends for backup, but they looked less certain now. Something about Alex's presence, calm, deliberate, almost official, made them uneasy. Claire studied the tall stranger more closely, her eyes catching on the subtle bulge beneath his coat near his hip. She recognized the outline immediately. It wasn't just a wallet or a phone. Her heart skipped a beat as realization crept in. "Sir," Alex repeated a little more firmly. "Step back. I won't ask again." Randy puffed out his chest. "You think you can tell me what to do?" "Who even are you?" Alex's expression didn't change. He slowly reached inside his coat and produced a leather ID case, flipping it open so Randy and everyone else could see the gleam of an official Homeland Security badge. The diner fell silent again. Even the storm outside seemed to hush for a moment. Claire's breath caught in her throat. The teenager near the jukebox whispered, "Homeland? Wait, is he serious?" Steven remained still, his hands folded on the table as if he'd been expecting this all along. Randy blinked, trying to process what he was seeing. His bravado faltered for the first time. That's fake, right?" he muttered, his tone unsure. Alex didn't rise to the bait. "It's very real," he said simply. "And I'm not here to make trouble unless I have to." One of Randy's friends tugged nervously at his sleeve. "Man, maybe we should just leave. I don't like this." But Randy's pride was still fighting to stay alive. "So you're some kind of fed," he said, though his voice had lost some of its earlier bite. "That's supposed to scare me?" Alex's gaze sharpened. It's not about scaring you. It's about ending this before you cross another line. Back away now." The authority in his words wasn't loud, yet it carried more weight than any shout could. For the first time all evening, Randy took an involuntary step back. His fingers loosened from the edge of the booth. Steven finally spoke, his tone low but carrying through the diner. "Alex, I told you we don't want trouble. Let's not give him any reason to feel cornered." Alex nodded slightly, never taking his eyes off Randy. "Understood, but I won't let anyone lay another hand on you." The exchange between father and son, measured, controlled, unafraid, shifted the mood of the room entirely. The customers who had been frozen in their seats began to relax just enough to whisper to each other. Claire dared to step out from behind the counter. "Look, Randy," she said softly, "it's over. Why don't you call it a night and walk out before things get worse?" Randy's jaw tightened. The fight in him hadn't completely died, but the ground beneath his arrogance was crumbling fast. The sight of the badge and the unwavering calm of both men at the booth left him visibly torn between backing down or doubling down. "Not sure who you two think you are," he muttered finally, but his voice lacked the edge it once had. "This ain't over." Alex's reply was almost gentle. "It can be over right now. The choice is yours." The words hung in the air as thunder rolled in the distance. The entire diner waited, breathless to see whether the bully would retreat or ignite the spark that could turn the standoff into something far worse. For a long moment, no one moved. The diner's ceiling fan hummed faintly above the tense silence, spinning lazily as if unaware of the storm unfolding beneath it. Randy stood a few feet from Steven's booth, fists still clenched, chest rising and falling with uneven breaths. Alex's badge remained visible in his hand, the metal glinting under the fluorescent light. It was a silent but powerful reminder that he wasn't just another bystander. "You don't want to do this," Alex said again, his voice calm but unwavering. "I'm giving you a way out. Take it." Randy's friends had lost their earlier bravado. The wiry one in the baseball cap looked at Randy with wide eyes. "Man, let's just go. This isn't worth it." But Randy's pride was like a live wire, too charged to let go. He spat on the floor near the booth and growled, "You think that shiny badge makes you better than me? I don't take orders from anyone, especially not from some feds kid." Steven finally shifted, uncrossing his arms and leaning forward, his elbows resting on the edge of the table. His eyes fixed on Randy, dark and steady like a hawk sizing up its prey. "I've sat here and given you every chance to walk away," Steven said, his tone quiet but cutting through the thick air. "But you keep digging yourself deeper. That's not courage, son. That's foolishness." The diner was so quiet that the rain outside sounded like distant applause. Randy bristled at being called son, his face turning red. "Who do you think you are, talking down to me like that?" Steven's reply was measured, almost philosophical. "A man who's seen too many people like you, people who mistake anger for strength. Real strength is knowing when to stop." The words seemed to ripple through the room. One of the truckers nodded silently, murmuring to himself, "He's right about that." Claire, still near the counter, dared to speak again. "Randy, just listen to him. Nobody wants this to get worse, please." Randy's breathing grew harsher. He wasn't used to being reasoned with. He was used to winning arguments by intimidation. But every time Steven spoke, it chipped away at his confidence like water eroding stone. "You think words are going to save you?" Randy scoffed, but his voice cracked slightly. Steven leaned back slightly, his posture relaxed, but his gaze unyielding. "Words save more than fists ever could. But if it comes to it, I won't let you hurt anyone here." The statement wasn't a threat. It was a promise, and that made it far more intimidating. Alex stepped forward, closing the distance between them by a single step. "Last warning," he said evenly. "Back down now and we can all walk out of here without paperwork or regret." For the first time, Randy hesitated, his eyes flicking between Alex's badge and Steven's unblinking stare. The weight of the room's attention pressed in on him. His friends shifted uncomfortably, clearly ready to bolt. The wiry man whispered, "Come on, man, we don't need this." Randy shook his head, trying to shake off the doubt creeping in. "Nah, he's just trying to scare me." He turned to Steven again, jabbing a finger in his direction. "You're all talk, old man. Let's see if you can back it up." Steven didn't flinch. Instead, he slowly pushed his coffee cup aside and stood up. The movement was deliberate, unhurried, yet it carried the weight of a storm gathering strength. even standing still. Steven seemed to tower over Randy, not just in size but in presence. "I'm done talking," Steven said, his voice still calm but carrying a sharp edge now. "You've disrespected this place, these people, and yourself. I won't let you go any further." The shift in his tone sent a ripple of unease through Randy's friends. One of them muttered, "This ain't good." Randy forced a laugh, though it sounded strained. "You think standing up makes you tough?" Steven took one step closer, closing the gap between them to barely an arm's length. His gaze didn't waver. "No, knowing when to stop makes you tough. Unfortunately for you, you don't seem to know when that is." The silence that followed was thick enough to hear the ticking of the wall clock above the counter. Alex stayed close but let his father take the lead, trusting him to handle it. Still, his posture remained ready. Should things turn violent, he was prepared to intervene in a heartbeat. Claire clutched her apron nervously, whispering under her breath, "Please let this end here." Randy's fists tightened again, but the tremor in his arm betrayed the uncertainty now seeping in. The bully who had once controlled the room was starting to lose his grip. "You got no right to lecture me," Randy muttered, his voice lower now, more defensive than aggressive. Steven's reply was simple. "I'm not lecturing you. I'm warning you for your own good, for a heartbeat." They stood there, two men locked in silence, the storm outside thrashing the diner's windows like drums of distant thunder. Then the bell over the diner door jingled softly as another figure entered, an officer in a soaked brown uniform, rain dripping from the brim of his hat. The sheriff had finally arrived. The crowd exhaled collectively, some in relief, others in anticipation. Whatever was going to happen next would either end this confrontation or set the stage for the final reckoning. The sheriff stood just inside the doorway, shaking the rain off his jacket. The storm outside rumbled as if it too was waiting for what came next. His eyes swept over the diner, the tense faces, the overturned coffee cup on Steven's table, the hulking figure of Randy with his fists clenched. "Evening," the sheriff said in a measured tone, though his brow furrowed as he took in the scene. "Somebody want to tell me what's going on here?" No one answered at first. The silence was thick with anticipation. Claire finally stepped forward, her hands still clutching the damp apron. "Sheriff, it was Randy. He started this. Mr. Seagal and his son didn't do anything. They were just trying to have dinner." The sheriff's gaze shifted to Steven, then to Alex, where his eyes stopped. Something in Alex's face seemed to strike a chord of recognition. "Wait a minute," the sheriff said, narrowing his eyes. "I know you. You're Alexander Seagal, aren't you? Homeland Security." A ripple of whispers spread through the diner like a current. Randy's smug expression faltered for the first time that night. He blinked, his jaw tightening as the realization hit. The man he'd been trying to provoke wasn't just some stranger's kid. Alex gave a curt nod. "That's right. I didn't want to make this official, but your friend here gave us no choice." The sheriff's posture shifted immediately, his tone gaining weight. "Randy, is this true? You harassed them?" Randy tried to scoff it off, though his voice sounded less confident. "He's just throwing his title around to scare me. We were just having a little disagreement." Steven finally spoke up, his voice steady but carrying an edge that cut through the noise. "A disagreement doesn't involve slapping someone while they're sitting down. It doesn't involve threatening a woman who asked you to stop." The sheriff's gaze hardened at Randy. "You slapped him?" Randy's friend shuffled uneasily, clearly unwilling to back up his story. The wiry man in the cap muttered under his breath, "You did hit him, Randy. We all saw it." The sheriff stepped closer to Randy. "You realize you could be facing charges for assault and disorderly conduct? And that's before we factor in the threat you posed in a public establishment." Randy's shoulders hunched slightly, his earlier bravado crumbling under the sheriff's words. "Look, I didn't mean anything by it, didn't know who they were." Steven took a small step forward, his presence commanding but not gloating. "You shouldn't need to know who someone is to treat them with respect." That line seemed to pierce the tension like a pin popping a balloon. The bystanders nodded in agreement, murmuring softly. Randy glanced at Alex again, trying to gauge whether there was a way out of the mess he'd created. "Look, I was out of line, okay? I'll apologize. Let's not make this worse than it has to be." Alex's reply was calm but resolute. An apology won't erase what you did, but it's a start. The sheriff will decide what comes next. The sheriff nodded. You're coming down to the station, Randy. We'll get this sorted, but you need to cool off and answer for tonight. The big man's head dropped slightly, his arrogance gone. He looked more like a chastised boy than the bully who had stormed in earlier. Claire exhaled, finally allowing herself to relax. Thank goodness, she whispered. Steven didn't smile or celebrate. He simply placed a reassuring hand on Claire's shoulder as she passed by, saying quietly, "You did the right thing by calling for help." As Randy was escorted out into the storm by the sheriff, his friends trailing nervously behind, the diner slowly came back to life. Conversations picked up, chairs scraped against the floor, and someone even let out a small, relieved laugh. Alex sat back down beside his father, shaking his head. I wanted to end this before it started, but I'm glad you stepped in when you did. You've always had a way of reaching people, even the stubborn ones. Steven looked toward the rain-soaked window, his voice thoughtful. Sometimes the hardest thing is knowing when to speak up and when to let the other person fall under the weight of their own choices. The mood in the diner shifted from tension to quiet admiration. People exchanged looks of respect for the father and son who had handled the situation with dignity instead of violence. By dawn, the storm had passed, leaving the small town wrapped in a cool mist. But the night's drama was just beginning to ripple far beyond the diner's rain-streaked windows. Claire had posted a short video clip of the confrontation, only a minute long, showing the moment Steven stood up to Randy and the sheriff arrived. By morning, the clip had been shared thousands of times across social media. Within hours, it hit 1 million views, drawing comments from every corner of the internet. Headlines began to appear online. Bully slapped Steven Seagal in small-town diner, instantly regrets it. Homeland Security agent's father confronts local troublemaker with dignity, not violence. The comments were a mix of awe and gratitude. People praised Steven's calm composure, admired Alex for stepping in without abusing his authority, and applauded Claire for having the courage to record what happened. One top comment read, "This is how real strength looks. No shouting, no fists, just dignity." Meanwhile, Randy's name started circulating too, though not in the way he would have liked. By noon, his employer announced he was suspended pending an investigation for his public conduct. The sheriff's department confirmed that Randy was facing charges of assault and disorderly conduct. The small diner where it all happened became something of a local landmark overnight. News vans parked outside, hoping to interview Claire and anyone else who had witnessed the scene. Claire, shy by nature, only said one thing to the cameras. "I just didn't want anyone to get hurt. Mr. Seagal handled it better than anyone else could have." Inside the diner, Steven and Alex returned for breakfast the next day. The regulars greeted them with nods of respect, and even strangers came up to thank them. "Didn't think I'd be on the internet for standing up to a bully," Steven joked softly, shaking his head as he sipped his coffee. Alex smiled. "You didn't just stand up to him. You showed people that calm can be stronger than anger. That's rare these days." Steven looked around at the faces in the diner, truckers, waitresses, families with kids, and replied, "Sometimes you teach more with patience than with punches. If even one person out there learns that from this mess, it was worth it." Later that afternoon, a local news anchor asked Steven for a comment. Standing outside the diner with the drizzle still falling, Steven's words struck a chord across the country. It doesn't matter who someone's father is or what title they carry. Everyone deserves to be treated with respect, especially strangers. The moment we decide some people are beneath kindness, that's when society starts to fall apart. I hope last night reminds people that humility is not weakness. It's the real measure of strength. Clips of his statement were replayed on TV and went viral alongside the diner footage. The hashtag #RespectFirst started trending, and thousands of users posted stories of times they'd witnessed or experienced similar acts of quiet dignity. Randy, meanwhile, released a brief apology through his lawyer, admitting he had let his temper get the best of him. But public opinion was already settled. His actions served as a cautionary tale about how quickly arrogance can backfire. The diner's atmosphere changed in the weeks that followed. Locals said it felt lighter, as if the incident had left behind not just a story, but a lesson. Claire noticed more people treating her and the staff with extra kindness, holding doors open, saying please and thank you more often. One evening, as Steven and Alex prepared to leave town, Claire stopped them by the door. "I don't think you realize what you did for us," she said, her voice warm but earnest. "You didn't just stop a bully. You reminded everyone that respect still matters." Steven smiled at her words but simply replied, "That's all we wanted." As father and son stepped out into the quiet street, the sun dipped low behind the clouds, casting the town in a golden glow. The world outside might still have its share of bullies and storms, but for that small town, and for the millions who watched online, Steven's quiet defiance had become a beacon. Final call to action for the audience. If you believe real strength is standing tall without tearing others down, type respect in the comments. And remember, kindness is the one fight we can all win together.